Well, all right. Welcome, everybody, to Scripture Night. And today's presentation is called Filthy Rag Salvation. Yes, indeed, my good brothers and sisters, this is a term that is often used in Christianity. However, I'm going to make the simple case that our works are like filthy rags when they're filthy, but our works are good when they're good works. This is a misuse of Isaiah 64, who was saying that the ancient Israelites were violating the law and being iniquitous. And this is why you're seeing the first century apostles, and yes, of course, Jesus himself, elevating the royal law, love your neighbor as yourself. Galatians 5:6, our faith worketh by love. Without love, our faith no worketh. See, my good brothers and sisters, our good works are evidence of our faith. It's love in action. It's a specific kind of faith that imitates the goodness of God in the authority of the Christ, who was indeed the express image of God. And he said to love one another. And we walk that out. We speak and do good works because our faith works by love. See, my good brothers and sisters, our faith isn't just some kind of belief system or a belief in a creed of some kind. And it's not ordinances. It's the greatest commandment in action. People can see the goodness of God when we work our faith by the power of love. And that's why you're seeing the instructions continuously through the New Testament to do good works, because it's evidence of our faithfulness to God and the Christ. Now, I'm dealing with this by releasing episode number 3 of my Feed the Sheep series. I did release episode 1 to the public, so I would recommend that you watch that first. And as for the second episode, it's mostly in Christianity Ignores Paul. And in that presentation, I cover most of what I cover in episode 2. So this will include episode 3. And as you're watching episode 3, ask yourself, why don't I see creeds? Why don't I see water baptisms? Why do I only see continuous instruction on how to do good things? And the answer is because our faith is love in action. I hope the message encourages you. Welcome, everybody, to the third episode of the Feed the Sheep series. I hope so far this has been edifying and helpful to you, and I hope that you're able to glean from these presentations, these teachings, in such a way that you can apply them into your everyday walk, because that is indeed the goal of this series. So today we're going to continue in 1 Timothy. We're going to move forward to chapter 3, where there are some descriptions, the kind of characteristics that Paul seems to be saying to Timothy. These are the kind of characteristics we want to see people have when they're operating according to the faith being, I'm going to suggest, called the way. If we want to call it Christianity, then there's a specific way that in our faith we're supposed to be operating. And these are the kind of characteristics that are necessary for us to operate in a very, very positive and a very effective way. These are the types of characteristics that I'm going to suggest we would hope that all people that are claiming to be God-fearing, Jesus Christ-believing Christians would have. So let's dig into 1 Timothy and take it on at chapter 3. All right, so chapter 3 at the beginning, and we're not going to forget these things that, again, Paul, a real person in the first century, the end of the age, the Mosaic age is coming. The beginning of the first Christian age, I would suggest, is around the corner. And he's instructing Timothy. And remember what he said at the beginning. Tell some not to teach any other teaching. This is the center post because the end goal is the commandment, which is love out of a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith, an unwavering, sincere faith. Notice words like sincerity, pure conscience, and agape love. So very, very important that that's the root of the faith and how it's supposed to operate and how it's supposed to look like. All right. And he says, this is a true saying. If a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. And that's good, all right? A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife. Now, don't underestimate, this was a patriarchal society, right? There's been plenty of folks that, they had the law of divorcement, which of course Jesus said from the beginning, 'twas not so. Obviously polygamy was a thing potentially, right? Obviously we know these things. So saying that sentence, we might look at, of course, husband of one wife. It's like, well, let's not glean over that. I think that's a huge, huge statement for the time. For the time, that was a big statement. And I'm going to suggest strongly that's a big move to say, look, this is the type of characteristic, particularly in a patriarchal society. And remember, Paul, he was a Pharisee. That's his background. So for him to really say, hey, we need to have men that are really committed to their families, committed to a wife, one wife, that's a real important characteristic so that our faith can really shine. Because I'm going to suggest men probably weren't so inclined to operate like this. All right. So this is part of the reason why I think today, listen, nobody's perfect. We understand there's still imperfections, but I think at least there are some men, certainly we could say, that want to lean into this type of positioning, right? The husband of one wife, vigilant, sober. Now keep in mind that sober certainly includes, you don't want to be drunk all the time, that kind of thing, but it also means sober-minded, temperate, right? Someone who doesn't click and boom, they're all of a sudden, because when people are really hot-tempered, they don't think straight. So I'm going to suggest that's part of it. Of good behavior. Now, this is very interesting to me because, again, this is the end of the commandment, the love, right? Pure conscience. And we have a theology out there in the Sunday buildings that tells you that your good works don't matter. They're like filthy rags. No. His instruction is good behavior. It's very, very clear. That is what our faith is displaying good, godly, honest, decent behavior. And it's rooted in love. So all that is here. So we need to let go of those dogmas and the Ephesians 2:8-9 people who don't bother with verse 7 or verse 10. And we have to really get back to business, which is the end, the sum total, the goal of the commandment, which is love our neighbor as ourselves. So good behavior is our faith. Okay. And when we're not behaving well, then we might be, right, putting a scar on our faith. Because what they've done is they've taken faith and made it belief systems. Right? No, it's not a belief system. Our faith is rooted in the operation and fueled by true, pure conscience, good behavior, love. That's what fuels our faith. Without that, faith without love is dead. So given to hospitality. So being hospitable, apt to teach. All right. So again, usually this would be reserved for people who have a little bit more experience. And why is that? Well, again, folks, I think this is very logical. People who have a little more experience, a little more wisdom in life and things of that nature, I think they can help understand, maybe what a 14-year-old or a 17-year-old or 22-year-old is going through. So typically we would want to see people taking these roles, these positions when they're a little older. Now, there can be exceptions to that, of course. We're not absolutists. But, when I'm seeing 20 to 25-year-olds trying to lead a bunch of youth, I'm not so sure that that's going to be fitting here, to be quite direct, because, especially in this day and age, I don't know too many 22-year-olds that can be they have to try to build their lives still, right? So I think it's those who are a little older, maybe 40, give or take, 50, something of this nature, to help the young folks get along. We have to help them, right? Much like Paul's handing the baton to Timothy. Well, we have to hand the baton to the next generation, if you will. I think that's part of the deal here. So that why? So the kingdom without end can continue, right? And by the way, how are you going to be apt to teach if you have no experience? And I'm talking about life experience, right? This isn't about, going to study what the square root of 9 is, right? This is talking about good behavior, living an optimum life. Okay, I'm sure you've met people that are super, super smart, but their lives are in absolute shambles. Right? And you go, man, this person's been, I remember playing at a wedding and the guy was on his 5th marriage. It's like, wow, that's not easy to do. So again, he was smart, all that was there, but his personal life was in constant turmoil. So because of that, I'm going to suggest that would be, for example, he's not qualifying for being a bishop, shall we say. So being too young, we got to be careful of that. And of course, we have to be careful if somebody's not kind of rolling in this, right? And he says, and he gets there, by the way, you're going to see what he says here. There's a reason for this. This isn't judgmentalness. This is, you have to be in a position. How can you help other people run their family if you're still in shambles? That's like going up to someone who just had 7 car crashes in 5 years. And you go, hey, can you teach me to drive? That's not a good idea. So this is much more practical than most people want to admit. And that's why sometimes they kind of get to those places where it seems chauvinistic and things of that nature. He's just trying to point to the godly lives and the peaceable lives. And these are the type of lives that get blessed and can bless others. And I think they're most pleasing to the Father and closest, if you will, to the instruction of Christ in the love your neighbor as yourself, right? So not given to wine. Can you have wine? Yes, absolutely you can. But you can't be sold out to it, right? You can't be waking up in the morning and, cracking a beer and pouring it in your Cheerios. Pretty simple. No striker, not greedy of filthy lucre. All right. Now, this is a touchy area because we all need some money to live on. But notice, it's not that he's saying that you can't get the money. He's saying they can't be greedy for it, because greed is where you end up operating dishonestly, maybe charging way more than you really have to have a decent life for you and your family. So you should indeed charge enough where you guys can survive. But on the flip side to that, I would suggest I'd like to see a little more of that in Christianity, for example, where Christians do good quality work, right? But they're always 10 or 15% cheaper than most other people, even though the quality of the work is the same. I think that would be a great witness to the way of God and the way of Christ, because God's always blessing. So, and then he says, not greedy of filthy lucre. Interesting, he says, but patient. So it's almost like people who are not patient tend to going after the loot, right? The Gordon Greco, greed is good. You know what I mean? I'm a mover, I'm a shaker, I'm a hustler, I'm out there making the money, Yeah, it's like, well, then they probably might be a little less patient than usual, right? Not a brawler and not covetous. Why? Because this violates the law of love. All these behaviors that he's suggesting, right? If you're not patient, then you're probably going to violate the law of love your neighbor. If you're brawling all the time, if you're always eyeing up other people's stuff, if you're very greedy, if you're a striker, if you're always drunk, the odds of you loving your neighbor as yourself in those types of characteristics, you're going to have some problems. Clearly, you're not going to meet the law. That's why these characteristics are important. And that's what he's doing here. He's feathering out ultimately the one law, love your neighbor as yourself. And if you're always impatient and you're always brawling and you're always covetous, then I'm going to suggest you're going to violate the law every time. One that rules well his own house. This is very important, right? So this is what might give. So for example, and that doesn't, again, no absolutists, there can be exceptions, right? But when people don't have their own wife, their own children that they've raised for, some years, and they're not 40 to 50 years old, then how is that person, right? And even someone who, for example, like priests, not all priests, but a lot of priests, right? They stay unmarried. I think it's going to be a little more difficult for them to really connect. I could be wrong. There can be exceptions, like I said, or, a nun, if you will. She might have a harder time explaining something to another young woman, right? Because, more than likely she hasn't had the experience of being married and how to deal with certain situations. And especially in a modern age, right? Because there's already things like cell phones and televisions and MP3s and things of this nature and YouTube channels and Instagram. Like, well, I mean, we have no instruction out of the Bible for that type of thing. And yet we are in a modern age of some kind here. And so if you go to someone who doesn't have the experience themselves with those things, I think it's harder to get some guidance from them. I think so. Okay. So it's something to keep in mind if you're looking for advice, or if you want to say, hey, I think I can give some advice, it should be based on the idea that your house is running fairly smooth. That doesn't mean everybody has to agree with everything in your house, but it's still running smooth, right? A functional, dysfunctional. All right. So why is it important that they rule his own house? Well, by the way, he's going to tell you very soon, in having his children in subjection with all gravity, right? And being serious, but again, not serious so much that you can't have some laughter, right? Paul talks about those things too. He just wants to make sure, listen, you got to run your household properly. You got to have some organization, some good self-control, make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing here. And I don't mind saying this. I think a lot of Christian families, and I'll use Christian in quotes, are not necessarily doing so great in this area. So again, this is a general idea, because I know sometimes households have other problems. Mom could have a problem, a dad could have a problem, but in general, I think this is how it's supposed to look. When I see a family that's taking any kind of advisory role, any kind of authority role in giving advice, then I think the children have to have their act together. Because if you can't have that together, then how can you expand your ministry, right? It's when your household is solid, you go, okay, we're solid here. Now we can go and help other people. So I'm going to suggest that this, once again, is a very, very practical bit of advice. And I'm going to say it again here. I don't know that this was really meant to be like a lording over a Sunday building kind of rudimentary thing. I'm just not seeing the water baptisms. I'm not seeing the creedal confessions. I'm seeing be sober, vigilant, good behavior, hospitable, apt to teach. You can have a glass of wine, but don't get carried away. Don't make some money, but don't be greedy. Like, these are just basic, good family rudiments and principles that I'm going to suggest that Paul's talking about here. I don't know that the Sunday buildings are doing great in these areas, to be quite direct here. I'm going to suggest they're not doing that great, but I'll let you make your own decisions. I know that my experience in this area, not so good. In fact, I'm going to just tell you straight out, there's not one person that I would go to in any of the Sunday buildings that I've ever met where I would ask them for advice in any shape, way, or form. So if you wouldn't go to them for advice on what's going on in your household or whatever, then what does that tell you? Then he says this, for if a man know not how to rule his own house, understand too, guys, the word ruling, it means to lead, to be the headship. And a good leader listens to his wife. A good leader listens to the children and considers what they have to say. So please understand that the old King James word here is rule. It's not like rule with an iron fist. Don't bring that tone here. What I would suggest to you is, if it's someone, and think about the rest of this, right? Oh, he's a man of one wife. He's sober. He's got good behavior. He's hospitable. Don't turn this in and ruling. See, like, it doesn't make any sense. So it's just a headship. He's leading the family well. He's participating in keeping things organized and healthy for everyone in the household, because has good behavior, right? Because he's not covetous, because he wants to be hospitable, because he's apt to teach, right? So now he can lead his house very well. It's balanced. So it can be serious, but, also some laughter, some fun, times to decompress. All that is someone who's leading his house well. And a good leader, I'm going to say it again, listens and considers everyone in the household, right? To bring it to the forefront, to say, okay, this is what's going to bring as much joy to the family and as much peace to the family as possible. All right. So someone who leads well listens well. That's why those instructions like, quick to listen, slow to wrath, right? Slow to speak, considering things. Good leaders do that. So hopefully that's the kind of household you have. And that's what we should all be shooting for. All right. And he says, if you can't lead well and keep your household together properly, then how are you going to be able to take care of the church? So in other words, take the mote out of your own eye, take the log out of your own eye before you start trying to participate in taking the slivers out of other people's. You have to be positioned properly and have some good experience, and you've got to have it flowing pretty good before you can help anybody else. So keep the sphere of your authority in good shape. Focus on that. Once you feel like you have that solid and down and consistent, then you might be able to even expand that advice. And I'm going to suggest to you that it'll come naturally. Again, I don't think it has to be a lord over. I think people are just going to be drawn to how your family is operating. If there is a Sunday building that you're going to operate in, then it has to be a Sunday building that leads with love, doesn't put love in the back in the U-Haul, leads with love, doesn't lead with doctrinals, creedals and stuff. You're going to be less effective, I think, in that way. That's just my opinion. but something for you to consider. And we're going to do one more line here to kind of wrap this up. That's why he says not a novice, not someone that's like fresh and new, because there's a thing called adulation. And I talked about this in a video with Willie T, where I talked to him about in music land, right? Most people say they want to be rich, right? And famous. And I'm like, well, sometimes it's just they want to be famous. Okay. And they're less concerned with money because they like the adulation. And don't think that a popular pastor, someone, that, oh man, that guy's such a holy person or such a good guy, that, or whatever, good woman, it doesn't matter. They can get sucked into pride and arrogance and start falling in love with the adulation and the admiration of the people. That can happen to people who are younger when they're 20, 25, and 30. I would suggest they're very, very susceptible. I think everybody's susceptible to that potentially all the time. But usually if you're a little more, you've got these, yeah, I've been that, and that goes nowhere. And they recognize that they had to go through some certain things, that experience. Whereas when you're a novice, you might get sucked in. So I see a lot of times where the Orthodox boxes are putting young people in charge of things that I don't think should be in charge of anything because they're still too young and they don't have the experience. And that's where, again, I don't think that how they're handling those things. Well, they have youth groups and things like that. Yeah, well, the youth group should not have a 20-year-old because the 20 or the 25-year-old knows little to nothing, especially this day and age. They don't even get out of school most of the time till they're 20 to 25. So much less, buy a house and get married and have children and raise children and pay some bills and have these types of experiences. So I'm going to suggest to you strongly that I think this is another area where, from where I'm sitting, I think for the sake of these good youth group ideas, they've departed from the instruction. And remember what Paul said, that they teach no other doctrine, right? And so if a novice, you got to be cautious. So something for you guys to think about. Not a novice. And why? There's a particular reason. He always has a reason when he says this. He's not trying to be, discriminatory towards 20-year-olds or whatever. He says, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the punishment of the devil, right? So the condemnation of the devil, the punishment of the devil, he's going to get sucked into something that he shouldn't get sucked into because he's going to start becoming prideful, because he could potentially start becoming really admired by a lot of people and start being propped up by a lot of people. And he may not be able to know how to control that. All right. So guys, I thought that it would be important to, once again, in the Feed the Sheep series, to really take a good look at what the qualities are of the kind of people that Timothy is being told. These are the types of characteristics we want to see in the leadership roles. And I think it's a well-balanced epistle in that regard. And I think when we're over-systemized, we have to be cautious with those things. So again, you'll have to use your own discretion for this. But I think that good families can be very, very effective without a whole lot of, systematic things. I think they can be very effective by operating continuously and taking the opportunities that God presents to you and your family to bless other people simply by operating in a good way. People, I think, are going to be drawn to the light of your household. So remember to do these types of things. Keep this in mind and compare it to what's going on so you can make some good decisions for you and your family, because that is the primary spot. Your family is the primary spot. Get that in the place where it's really comfortable. And then if you feel like you're being moved, who knows, maybe you can shine the light from your family position and people will just be drawn to the wonderful things that are happening in your family. All right. So it's a great way to display the love and the doctrine of God. All right. So thanks guys for listening. I hope this has been edifying for you. In the meantime, remember, do all things with agape love.